So it was the first Thanksgiving in the little house that my mother and I moved into after I became an empty nester and my youngest daughter went off to college. A lot more sense to move in together. So we combined our resources and found a little house in Fairport, which was a Cape Cod with a certain floor plan that allowed us each to have a private living area. So it was perfect for us. The only drawback was it was a very little kitchen. You know, an eat-in kitchen, no dining room, that kind of a Cape Cod. Well, it was about Thanksgiving time and the girls were coming home for Thanksgiving. I had gone the night before, Wednesday night, to pick up Cassie at Amtrak. She was in New York studying at School of Visual Arts. And I never really knew if I would recognize her when I picked her up at Amtrak because she was very creative with her dress and look. She could have long white hair with blue streaks and look like an alien, or she could have shaved her head off in a brush cut, brown, wearing jeans, and I would pass her thinking she was a teenage boy. I actually did that. But this time, I did recognize her. She was carrying a video camera and a tripod and announced that she had a special video project she needed to complete this Thanksgiving. So we went home. My other daughter, Carrie, had driven in from Ithaca, where she worked at the small animal clinic there. She's always been the animal lover. And so she brought with her two rescue dogs. One was ancient Gus. It took him forever to just walk across the kitchen floor. And the other was a puppy, big puppy, that she had just rescued. He'd broken both front legs in a car accident. He was dropped off at the animal hospital and they were going to put him down. But she said, no, I'll pay for the operation. Well, the vets wouldn't let her pay, so they did it anyway. So she comes home with this dog with casts on his front legs. So he's hopping around the kitchen, the linoleum floor like one of those wind-up toys. So now remember, the kitchen is small. So we've got the two dogs and the water dishes and the food dishes, and everything is going along all right. I get up early Thanksgiving morning to stuff the turkey, but I can't find the turkey. So where's the turkey? Cassie had wrapped it in towels and placed it on Grandma's sofa to watch TV. Turns out her project is to show Thanksgiving from the turkey's point of view. She was a vegetarian, so she thought that'd be cool. So that was all right. So we're working on the vegetables. Mom, who had to breathe through one of those cannulous long plastic tubing that was hooked to the condenser in the bedroom down the hall. So we had to be careful not to trip over Mom's oxygen tubing as well. So pretty much it was not running into the dogs, not stepping on the oxygen tube. And then Cassie brought the tripod and the camera out to the oven because she needed to get the video and the sound of the meat crackling and hissing as it roasted. So she's got the tripod there with a microphone inside the oven door. And meanwhile, I'm just trying to get the food ready. So finally, we were all gathered around the table. I'd survived. I was very thankful that I'd not run over any dogs and not knocked over any tripods. Not stepped on Mom's oxygen tube. We were gathered all around the table, and I was very, very grateful. Grateful to have my two girls home, grateful to be together again as family. Well, this year, my daughters are off living lives of their own in California, Wyoming, mom's in another whole dimension somewhere. And I'm spending Thanksgiving with friends because we all have those friends that become like family to us over the years. And I'm always reminded and love what Mother Teresa said. We draw the circle of our family too small. So it occurs to me that the day before Thanksgiving is the most traveled day of the year, which tells me that family and being together as family, despite all of our differences and idiosyncrasies, is a very important need and pleasure for us. And I think that's why we come to church here on Sunday. It's for that sense of family. It's for that sense of being welcome, despite our differences, to sit at the table. And I just want to say I'm grateful for this church family and thankful for each one of you.
With a reading called Perhaps the World Ends Here by a Native American poet named Joy Harjo. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of the earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh at us, laugh with us at our poor falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at a table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and have prepared our parents for burial at this table. We sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. So this story is called, this sermon is called The Stories We Tell. My mother was a great storyteller. As a feature writer for our local newspaper, she interviewed people and then wrote stories about them. But even more, she told stories aloud. She told about people she met in the grocery store, or at the gas station, and she told stories about us, her children, often to our great embarrassment. She had this knack for making ordinary events in her own life seem hysterically funny. We all tell stories. It's what we do as human beings. It's how we pass on the history of our ancestors. It's how we make meaning out of the apparent chaos of our lives, of the random incidents that make up our days. The writer Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, writes this about creating stories. She says, an incident is an event that happens in real time with real consequences, usually involving real and often raw emotion. A story is what you make out of it later. In the process of building a story, you sand down the sharp edges of an incident, buffing away all the pain and immediacy and urgency, creating something you can carry around, flee in your pocket. A story is a magnificent thing because it puts you back in control. So Gilbert goes on with this story. Growing up, she says, my grandfather used to tell the tale of his cousin who who had a habit back in the 1950s of getting drunk late at night and then going for nude swims in the Erie Canal, all alone. One night, this poor fellow locked himself out of his truck, which contained his clothing. He was forced to walk home several miles along the one main road of his hometown, wet and naked. But it gets better. My grandfather's cousin had found a tiny washcloth in the bed of his pickup truck, the only thing he could use to hide his nakedness. As he walked home, whenever he saw a car coming from the front, he used the cloth to cover his private parts. When he heard a car approaching from the back, he would cover his bottom. Inevitably, of course, two cars approached at the same time. Should he cover his privates or his bottom? So I asked him, my grandfather said, "What did you do?" And the cousin shook his head ruefully and said, "All I can say is this: I've always hoped I made the right decision." My mother told stories like this, stories that kept her in control. She embellished and polished, offering her stories as a gift to the people who laughed along with her. Telling these entertaining stories is one way to bring people together and appreciate the events in our lives and the lives of our ancestors. It connects us. And yet it may not reveal much of a storyteller's soul. After my mother died, I realized how rarely she spoke of her deepest fears and loves, of her sadness and aspirations. Her storytelling kept us laughing, but it masked serious difficulties in her own life by focusing on other people. This is one way to avoid facing our hurting past or to risk what others might think of our vulnerable selves. We need a different kind of storytelling to find our own truth, where we listen to our hearts and allow our deepest selves to shine through the story. And we need a safe place, a kitchen table that's our house in the sun, our umbrella in the rain, as the poet says, that allows the truth to emerge. Rachel Naomi Remen is a physician who has faced debilitating disease herself. She's now a counselor for people who are facing very serious disease. And she understands her patients' stories as a way of knowing our common humanity, that which holds us together as a universal family. We talked about expanding the circle of our family. We tell our stories as we sit around a metaphorical kitchen table. Telling them, Remen says, we are telling each other the human story. In her book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, Remen writes, all real stories are true. Stories are someone's experience of the events of their life. They're not the events themselves. Like Elizabeth Gilbert, she knows that it's the way we tell our stories and not the actual event that creates meaning. Remen acknowledges that most of us experience the same event very differently. More than once, I've had moments when I've questioned a sibling, sometimes my brother Ralph, who is a member of this congregation, who can tell stories the way my mother did, but I go, was I there? And I don't remember it the same way at all. Have you ever had that experience? Yeah. The root of power in stories is not the facts, but seeing something familiar through new eyes. Our experiences and attitudes create a lens through which we see the world. Our lens may make us see people and events with gratitude or with anger, with love or through eyes of fear. We have a choice about which way we'll see our lives. And we have a choice about which lens to use when we tell our stories, one that leads to forgiveness or one that keeps us in a place of sadness or anger. Changing the lens may take time and it may take help, but it can be done. Dr. Remen writes of a woman who has Crohn's disease who found herself surprisingly devastated by the need to have a root canal. Over time, and with Dr. Remen's help, the woman learned to tell her story in a way that let her re-experience the depth of her sadness and her fear at having had so many operations, so much damage to her body. She was terrified of yet another surgery. But by telling and retelling and reshaping her story, finally the woman was able to laugh at how minor a root canal would be relative to everything else she'd experienced. Root canal, schmoot canal, she finally said. Remen writes, looking deeply and honestly at her woundedness, she had found her power, experienced her own indomitable will to live, her courage, and her ability to heal herself over and over again. Perhaps every victim, she writes, is a survivor who does not know it yet. Seeing ourselves as survivors means looking at our stories with different eyes. Elizabeth Lesser, who founded Omega Institute and wrote a book called The Seeker's Guide, writes of a troubled time when she was afraid to make some major changes in her life. Driving home one night on a dark highway under a great deal of stress after a difficult meeting, she was feeling angry, miserable, and tired. In the darkness, she saw something at the side of the road, the face of a deer. Suddenly, antlers came through her windshield, and she lost control of the car. Miraculously, she says, she swerved safely through heavy traffic. Landing at the edge of the thruway, she let go of the wheel and felt this enormous sense of composure and peace. She put down the burden of her overextended life and floated, she said, knowing that her life was about to change. But then later on in the book, Lesser tells the same story through a different lens, as an old grandmother might have told it at a kitchen table, or a shaman relating a mythical tale around a fire. She frames it as a hero's tale, a story of deep meaning. In this version, her destiny and the deer's are interlocked. They were racing down the highway together. Exactly at the right moment, the deer cut through the trance with shining eyes and pointed horns. A male deer, a buck, she writes, illuminated by the headlights. Our eyes met for what seemed like a long time. And then the glass shattered into my face and hair. We swerved and turned round and round, moving together in slow motion through the speeding traffic. And then stillness, silence. And finally, the truth of this story. I knew then that I would soon make the change I feared and take back the power that was mine. I would take back the power that was mine. She did. She changed her life radically after this incident. Telling this story in this mythical way gives it strength and power, makes it a hero's journey. This way of storytelling draws on the larger themes of life, not just the incident itself. It calls forth beauty and mystery, journey and destiny, love and fear and hope and growth. So the way I tell my own story has changed over the years also. Here's the bare bones. When I was a 19-year-old college student, I got pregnant. Not knowing what to do, I told my mother, who insisted that we keep it a secret from the rest of the family, even my siblings. My college dean was worried about a stain on the school's reputation. She granted me a leave of absence on medical reasons, on the conditions that I not speak to anyone about my pregnancy, and that I stay in school through the end of the first semester so I could finish exams. By that time, I was 5 months pregnant. My mother arranged for me to live for a while with a family in Connecticut and act as their nanny, helper person. And then close to my due date, I was moved to a home for unwed mothers where I stayed until my daughter was born. After I relinquished her and signed the adoption papers, my mother and I wept together for an afternoon and then hardly ever spoke of it again. This story of loss and pain dominated my life for years. The black hole in my heart never quite healed, even after I married and had a wonderful son, and then divorced and went to business school and moved to Rochester and sent my son to Harvard, and then married Bob and built a good life. That black hole lived with me for years, along with feelings of shame and unworthiness and powerlessness. It was how I understood the event, how I told the story of my experience. Over the years, I told a few people about relinquishing my daughter, giving them just the bare bones. My inner circle started with a few close friends in college, and then I told my siblings, and then a few other people whom I really trusted. The people who mattered in my life were the people who knew. But keeping this secret from most people meant I was living a divided life. The real Libby, the one who had gotten pregnant and given a child up for adoption, didn't show up for most people. I couldn't be that vulnerable. The shame of having been an unwed mother kept me silent. And eventually, luckily, thankfully, I found my kitchen table in an autobiography class at Writers and Books in Rochester. Our compassionate, gentle teacher asked us to begin by writing the names of the chapters that we'd include in our autobiography. And then we sat with one other person and talked about why we had chosen those themes. I called the chapter about the adoption Shame and Disgrace. And it turned out that the woman I was paired with had been adopted herself. We talked and talked and talked. That class became my kitchen table, the place where it was safe to share my loss and my pain and my hopes to reconnect with my daughter. Now, years later, I would give that chapter a different title. I'd call it What We Do for Love. After many years and many tellings, I understand my story differently, through a lens of love, a lens that helps me forgive myself and my mother for the pain we shared. Rather than focusing on shame and disgrace, I now see that I gave my daughter up for adoption because I loved her and wanted what was best for her. I wanted her to have a solid family. I understand that my mother was trying to shield me from the judgments of the world we lived in. I know she loved me so much that she stayed with me through this whole difficult time, visiting me often and coming to the hospital as soon as my daughter was born. Her love for me and my love for my daughter are the central issues in this story. The pain will always exist, but love is the real story. And here's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. Remember Paul Harvey? Here's the rest of the story. February 10th is reunion day in our house. It's the anniversary of the day in 2001 when my daughter decided on a whim, she says, to search online. She typed her birth date into adoption.com, and poof, she says, there you were. She called the clearinghouse, and they called me, and we were reunited. The black hole was replaced by this incredible woman. I had named her Anne Elizabeth. That was the name on her original birth certificate. Her parents named her Annette, and she's always been called Annie. How much of a miracle is that? Annie turned 50 last May. Bob and I went to celebrate with her in Charlotte, where she lives with her 2 gorgeous children who are so tall. You wouldn't believe how tall they are, given their little grandma. They're all an integral part of our family now, just more of our great big family of kids. I am so grateful, so blessed. It's taken years for me to change the way I tell this story. It's gone from being a story of shame and loss to one of love and gratitude and forgiveness. I understand now that I was part of a much broader phenomenon in our culture, and that my mother was doing the best she could. She said that I had gotten myself into this mess and that I needed to see it through. And I am grateful for that now. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have had Annie and her kids in my life. So while I may have resented being hidden away and pushed to give my child up for adoption, I've forgiven my mother and myself and the good ladies at the home for unwed mothers where I stayed. Retelling the story through a lens of love doesn't mean that the pain has gone away, but it allows me to experience joy as well as sadness. I'll always carry the loss of those 35 years when I didn't know whether Annie was safe or happy or even still alive. But this has become a story of hope and grace, and it changed my life. So when we tell our stories around our metaphorical kitchen tables, not only do we hear ourselves differently, but we also connect with each other and offer the possibility for others to tell their stories with new meaning. When we hear each other's true stories, there's only one true response: compassion and connection. As people of faith, we need to listen to our own stories and how we're telling them. And we need to open our stories, we need to open our hearts to the stories of other people, the people we love and people we don't know so well. If we could hear the individual stories of refugees fleeing the terror of their homelands, how could we not open our own hearts and our homeland to them? We are all human beings, more alike than not, and we find that oneness through listening to each other's stories. Rachel Naomi Remen writes, "Hidden in all stories is the one story. The more we listen, the clearer that story becomes. Our true identity, who we are, why we are here, what sustains us, is in that story." The stories at every kitchen table are about the same things: stories of owning, having, and losing, stories of sex, of power, of pain, of wounding, of courage, hope, and healing, of loneliness and the end of loneliness. May your Thanksgiving tables be filled with stories that open your hearts to our common humanity. May you hear the one story that is our story. May it be so, and amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.